Hello, welcome to episode 5. Please don't forget to follow us on Instagram, where we've got all our links for all our other episodes that already came out. And today we've got in our beautiful studio, Melinda.
I'm going to do the introductions today. So we've got Clare Pooley, who's a New York Times bestselling author, a blogger, a speaker, and a Fulham resident. Had to get that in.
We've got them
that's
all,
the most
all ticked.
important bit.
So welcome, and thank you so
Welcome,
much
Clare.
for joining us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. And what a great studio.
I know, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Right on our doorstep.
Who would have known? Like, it's amazing how, people talk and then you just need something, and it seems like Fulham's got them all.
Yeah, I had no idea this was here.
Here
It's
we are.
fantastic.
Yeah, it's really good. So I think maybe we should start from the beginning and touch on it sort of briefly and move through, because we've got so much to talk about. Because here we've got this amazing stack of books that you've written. And so, yes, we've got lots to discuss. So I guess the starting point is the Sober Diaries, and then sort of linking in, I guess, into our connection, which is actually, Claire was in advertising. So that was your career.
I think probably the best place to start is about 2015, so that's now 9 years ago, and I was living in Fulham. I was a mum with 3 young kids. So
Another
at the time,
dinosaur.
She keeps...
I keep telling Melinda she's been living in Fulham forever. So I'm saying dinosaur, good dinosaur.
Yeah, I've been here for a long time too. So 3 children, 11, 8 and 6 at the time. And I had I've been working in advertising for about nearly 20 years, actually, with Melinda's husband.
Yes.
Okay, so that's how you guys know each other.
Yeah, and in advertising in those days, it wasn't that dissimilar from Mad Men, to be honest. So we used to drink all the time. When I first joined the agency, we had 2 bars in the office, one for regular people
In the office?
in the office, and one for directors. And I had a massive expense budget, which I was supposed to spend sort of taking clients out, eating and drinking and clubbing and you name it. And we were all, it was the era of Sex and the City, absolutely fabulous. You remember Bridget Jones.
Yes.
The
thought is coming out.
And I figured that, part of being an emancipated woman was drinking just as much as the men. And I did. And I carried on sort of drinking gradually more and more as time went on, and my tolerance grew until this point in 2015, where I'd quit work as after my third child was born. And I found myself drinking, I hate to admit this, but over a bottle of wine a day. So a bottle of wine probably on a weekday, weekends maybe 2. So it adds up to about 10 bottles of wine a week, which is way more than the government guidelines.
But it's easy to get there, right?
Yeah, and I knew a lot of people who were doing the same, right? So I didn't really think it was anything that unusual. And on a Fulham play date, you were just as likely to be offered a glass of wine as you were a cup of tea. So, I really didn't see for a long time that it was a problem. But by this point, it had become obvious that it was a bit of a problem, because I had terrible insomnia. I was really anxious the whole time. My whole life seemed to have sort of got stuck in a rut, and I felt like I wasn't being a good mother at all. And I was 2 stone overweight at least, and it was everything was going wrong. All the wheels were starting to fall off. Although nobody really knew. Nobody said, "Oh, I think you've got a problem" or anything like that.
And family members never said anything to you?
My mother was the only person who had the nerve to say anything, and we had a big row about it. And I didn't talk to her for a few days afterwards, and I had to apologise eventually. But she was the only person that ever said anything. So I was in a terribly bad way, and I knew I had to quit, but I was too ashamed to tell anyone. I didn't want to tell my GP, I didn't want to tell my husband, I didn't want to tell any friends. But I knew I sort of had to talk to somebody. So by way of therapy, I started this blog, and I called it Mummy Was a Secret Drinker. And in it, I wrote every day about what it was I was going through and what it felt like not drinking and the research that I was doing, at the time, I felt really alone, and I thought my life was pretty much over. I thought life without alcohol was going to be really miserable, and I could totally understand why people don't, feel terrified of quitting, because I was terrified. I spent 10 years trying to convince myself I didn't need to. I spent 10 years trying to drink sensibly, which didn't work, and it took me a long time to realise that I was not one of life's natural moderators. So anyway, so I started this blog. I didn't publicise it at all, and I sort of blogged under a pseudonym. I called myself Sober Mummy, but it went viral, and within a year it had had over 3 million hits, and people all over the world were sort of...
Blogging was big then.
Yeah, it was. It's not now, but back then it was, and nobody was talking about this sort of stuff. So, if anyone... after I'd been blogging for a few months, if anyone sort of Googled, am I an alcoholic, or how do I stop drinking, my blog would come up. And, I think that's how it sort of went slightly crazy. Anyway, to cut a long story short, as a result of all of that, I ended up publishing the story, the sort of edited version of this blog as a memoir called The Sober Diaries.
That's phenomenal.
And which is here if you're watching this on YouTube. And that came out at the beginning of 2018, so 6 years ago now.
So then how did it go from them writing a memoir to then saying, right, I'm going to carry on and I'm going to write a novel? How did that next stage happen?
So the Sober Diaries was published, and I, by this stage, my new addiction was writing. So I wanted to carry on writing, but I didn't really want to carry on writing about my own life, because you've got kids. You know what it's like. Your children don't like their lives being exposed. So, and my kids were growing up. So I thought, I can't carry on writing about my life when it's really writing about their lives as well. So I thought, well, I'll try writing fiction. And I did a novel writing course with Curtis Brown, which I highly recommend if anyone sort of is looking at writing professionally.
Can I ask something? Mm-hmm. After the alcohol phase, and it was something that you did because of your work and to belong and to be a part of. Would you recommend to everyone that's got this issue to start writing?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, if you've got any issue at all, writing is a really helpful thing. The Americans call it journaling, and it's great therapy. It's a great way of working out what's going on in your head, and writing your thoughts down makes them more understandable. It makes you more able to see your way through. And also, if you're quitting drinking or doing anything or dealing with any form of addiction, it's really helpful to be able to go back and see what it felt like at the beginning, because it gives you a sense of progress, and it also reminds you why you're doing what you're doing. So and it doesn't have to be a blog. It can be, you can write on Instagram, you can write in an old-fashioned journal. It doesn't matter where you do it, but writing it down is a really helpful thing to do. And for me, it led to a whole new career, because I found that, having spent so much time writing about my own life, I sort of found what my publishers would call my voice. You talk about an author's voice, and, I developed that through writing about my own life, and then I used it to write about fiction. So, yeah.
So the first book?
So the first book, it's all set in Fulham.
Yes.
Which I love. And it was just so brilliant being able to recognise different spots.
Sure. The book's called The Authenticity Project. And funny enough, I quite often get messages from people, from other parts of the world, because it's been translated into over 30 languages. Wow. And people send me messages saying, I'm coming to London and I want to visit the places in the book.
Or I want to go to I'm not going to spoil the story, but I want to go to the cafe where the notebook was left.
Yeah, well, they do. They say, can I go to Monica's Cafe? And actually, Monica's Cafe doesn't exist. No. The address I gave for Monica's Cafe is where Emma Bridgewater used to be. So right next to Nomad Books. But anyway, so The Authenticity Project is all set in Fulham, and it's the story of a little green notebook. And the notebook was owned by an artist called Julian Jessup, who lives in Chelsea Studios. So Chelsea Studios is a real place. It's right next to Chelsea Stadium, this amazing little artist colony between Chelsea Stadium and Brompton Cemetery. And I was always obsessed by this place. So I used to take the number 14 bus.
You can see,
and
right?
Yeah.
Look
And if you sit on the top deck of the number 14 bus, you can look over the wall into the studios. They were built by an Italian sculptor who wanted to build a little sort of artist colony based on that reminded him of his estate in Florence. So it's got this sort of these lovely little sort of cobbled courtyards and little fountains and statues and these amazing little houses. And the idea was that in order to live there, you had to be an artist or a sculptor or something to do with the art world. And I used to sort of stalk estate agents' details. It just looked fascinating. And when I Googled it, I discovered the history behind it. And then, I would look at estate agents' details online so I could see what these places looked like on the inside. And a number, some that came up for sale, vast expense, were sort of really quirky and interesting. So anyway, so that was where the idea of this artist, Julian Jessup, came from. He lives in Chelsea Studios, and he'd been living there since the 1960s, and the whole of Fulham and Chelsea had changed around him, but his world had remained just the same. But his wife had died 15 years previously. He was really lonely, and he decided to get this notebook. He wrote on the front the Authenticity Project, and then inside he wrote the truth about his life and about how lonely he is. And he leaves this notebook in a cafe on the Fulham Road, the one that doesn't really exist, called Monica's Cafe. And Monica, the owner, finds the notebook, reads his story, decides to track him down and try and change his life for the better. And she writes her story in the notebook and leaves it in a wine bar over the other side of the road. And basically, this little notebook is passed between 6 different characters who all tell the real truth about their lives, and in doing so they all end up meeting each other and changing each other's destinies
have
for the future.
goosebumps, and this should be a movie, Claire.
Well, I have sold the film rights, so fingers crossed. I hope they don't translate it to New York or somewhere else, because it's
Great.
Can
you imagine it needs to be filmed right here?
Yes, but it must.
So I have said that I really want it to be filmed in Fulham, but unfortunately I can't insist that it does.
You can't.
It is. But
what I love about that book as well, besides all the great Fulham kind of details and locations that you'll recognise, is I love, and I think you've said this before, of how it relates back to the fact that the Sober Diaries was a memoir, and then that links in, they always say, write about what you know. And although you didn't want to continue writing about your life, all the reasons that you said, this is almost sort of a step on, a natural step on from that.
Yes, it was, because, effectively what I'd done with the Sober Diaries is to tell the real truth about my life, the truth that people couldn't see.
That was your own notebook.
Yeah, and in doing so, that changed the lives of, hundreds and thousands of people around the world. And that's really the idea behind the Authenticity Project, which is how telling the real truth about your life can impact the people around you and change their lives too.
Absolutely.
So yes, it is slightly autobiographical, and there's an addict in it called Hazard, who's a alcohol and cocaine. Should I tell you a secret about his name?
Yes, I love a secret.
So many years ago, I met this guy called Hazard Stackpool. I don't know if anyone's met him. He's about the same age as me, and he was a great friend of my boyfriend at the time. And I'd never met him since. I met him once about 30 years ago. And I remember talking to him about his name, and I said, if I ever write a novel, which I really want to do one day, I'm going to call the hero Hazard, because it's such a cool name.
It is a cool name.
Yeah, and anyway, he got in touch with me when the book came out and said, "Hi, do you remember me as Hazard?"
That's me in there.
You actually did it.
Yeah.
And so from there on to the people on Platform 5. So what year did that come out?
So that came out the Authenticity Project came out just before lockdown.
Yes.
So, just after lockdown, rather. So all the bookshops were closed, which was really tragic. The People on Platform 5 came out in 2022, so 2 years ago.
I think that it's an extraordinary idea what you've done there with how people hate commuting. And I think in that book, literally people have, you can fall in love by commuting. You can change lives by commuting. You feel better by commuting. So I think that, let's talk about the book.
Oh, thank you. The People on Platform 5, I started writing during lockdown. Do you remember it was, try not to think about it too much now because it feels like this sort of horribly bad dream.
Yeah.
But, we all miss sort of friends and family. But, I also really missed strangers. I really missed being surrounded by crowds of people. It felt really weird living in London and not being in a crowd. And I started sort of remembering how we used to take the train to work and the tube and the buses, and you were always surrounded by huge hordes of people, and you used to see the same people over and over again, and you sort of
the
invent
same time schedule as you.
Yeah, and you'd
walking out
invent
the
these
door.
stories about their
that?
lives, and
Yeah.
you'd sort of imagine who they were married to, if they were married, or
I'm
what
not the only
secrets
one that
they
did that.
had. And, we all, and you'd give them
I
little
thought-
nicknames and all
Yes.
that sort of stuff. But you never talk to them, because you never ever talk to people on public transport in London because they think you're really weird. And I started thinking in lockdown, what would happen if I had spoken to some of those people on my commute? What might that have led to? A great romance or a mystery or something? And that was where the idea of the People on Platform 5 came from, which is basically about a group of commuters who see each other quite often. They all give each other nicknames. They have, they've made massive assumptions about each other, which all turn out to be completely wrong. And but they never speak until right in chapter 1, so it's not a spoiler. One of them chokes on a grape and nearly dies, and his life is saved by the Heimlich manoeuvre. And that act starts them talking, and that leads to all sorts of interesting things. So that was the second book.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
What could happen on this train that would get those people talking? Because, I just couldn't think of initially of anything that would be
Did you
dramatic
actually go
enough.
on the train and you?
No, because at the time it was lockdown and
yeah,
everything
of
was
course,
everything was closed. Anyway, so I remembered when I was on the tube once on that district line, and there was this guy sitting right opposite me, and I was on my way into the office, and he started looking really green, and started sort of going. If you're listening to this on audio rather than seeing the visual, making like gagging sort of expressions, and everybody around him was looking really nervous because it was obvious that the guy had a terrible hangover and was about to vomit all over the place, and we're also looking. Nobody says a word, and he's going. And eventually he picks up his very smart suitcase, and he's dressed in this really smart suit. He looks like he's going into the city, sort of expensive watch, all that sort of stuff. And he picks up this really smart briefcase, puts it on his knee, opens it, vomits into the suitcase, closes it again, and then walks off the tube.
No.
And nobody says anything.
Do you know what?
Did you just all look at each other?
guys,
We all looked at each other. There was a bit of smirking and a bit of sort of... But
I'm allowed to
nobody
say
said
it.
a word.
This is such a British way of dealing with it.
Vomiting in public.
I'm in papers, but for me, it's still it amazes me.
So figured if that can happen and nobody says anything, then it has to be something more dramatic than somebody vomiting
the
into
book,
their
guys.
suitcase. So hence the near-death experience in chapter 1, I thought was the only way to sort of get these people talking. But because it was lockdown, I wasn't travelling on the train at the time, and I set the whole thing on the line between Hampton Court and Waterloo, which is the line I grew up travelling on because I was born in East Molesey near Hampton Court. So that was the train line, but I couldn't go on the train line to, check what it was like. And I hadn't been on that line for about, 40 years. So anyway, so I was writing along, finished the whole book, and eventually things opened up. So I thought, right, I'm going to have to take this train and
do the
check
route, yeah.
check whether it's whether it's all accurate. And so I go to Waterloo, I get on the train, and I thought, oh my God, there are no bloody tables. And in so many scenes in the book, I have people around a table, and then the table is really crucial for some things that happen. And I thought, well, either I have to rewrite the whole book to take out the tables, or instead, what I did was I just wrote a little note in the author's notes saying, if anybody travels on this line,
I do know there are no tables.
They may be aware that there are no tables on Southwest trains, and huge apologies, but please call it artistic license.
Because as well, if you didn't say
But this
anything,
is the
somebody's
beauty.
going to be messaging you or pointing it out to
But
you.
this is the beauty of
Exactly.
writing, Claire. You have just changed the Southwestern way of,
I made it better.
Exactly. Why not? Why having a table where you can talk to each other and not work with your computers and whatever not?
Yeah.
We're looking at the positives.
So before we go on to your next book, which is due to be released very soon. And
I
it's,
cannot wait to hear all about it.
Yeah, 4
Melinda,
weeks.
you read it.
I have read
and
it.
I'm so jealous. I want to read it.
Before we go into that, I thought, because you are a Fulham resident, it would be lovely just to chat to you a little bit sort of about the area. And I know we've spoken about it before, but sort of how you arrived in SW6 and why you've stayed.
Oh, yeah, I've been backwards and forwards, actually, to Fulham. So I first moved here when I graduated from university, and it was back in the days when students could afford to live in Fulham, extraordinary. But I shared a house there were 4 of us, and I think the 2 of the 4 were junior medics, and they were crazy. Are we? We were all slightly
with a big
crazy.
smile on your face. And they're crazy.
Our house
Love it.
so we lived in this little house on Petley Road, which is one of the houses off Fulham Palace Road. And it was a complete mess, and we had parties all the time, and it was great fun, but quite wild. And I really pity my landlord, who was called Wayne, I seem to remember. So Wayne, if you're listening to this, I'm really sorry. So yeah, so I lived there initially, and then I moved when I bought my. Before then, I moved to a flat in Wandsworth Bridge Road, which was great fun. And then I bought my own place in, this would be in the mid-90s, and I bought a large 1-bedroom flat on 2 floors on Stevendale Road, so down by...
No Wandsworth Bridge.
Just again off Wandsworth Bridge Road, and I bought that flat for £80,000.
Wow.
Which,
Bring back the 90s, guys.
Yeah. So I feel so sorry for our kids who they're just. Yeah, the idea of being able to afford a flat in Fulham in your mid-20s, is just impossible. But I was very lucky, and I did. And then when I got married, I moved out of Fulham for a few years, and then when our second child was born and we started running out of space in Lancaster Gate, which is where we were living, we moved back to Fulham again.
Oh, look at that smile on her face.
So, so I didn't stay away for very long.
No.
There's nothing not to love about Fulham.
Yeah, it's such a great place to live. It's a great place to bring up a family as well, I think. And
So lucky with so many green spaces.
Yeah, and lots of I remember when we looked around Fulham when we just got married, or we're about to get married, and we were sort of looking for our first home. And I remember we sort of said, "Oh, not sure this is right for us because there are just prams and pushchairs everywhere, and that's not really us, So we bought this flat in Lancaster Gate. And then, a few years later, we went to look around Fulham again. It's like, wow, all these prams and pushchairs.
It's going to work for us now.
This is really us.
Love it. And outside, because everyone always goes Fulham Palace, because we're so lucky to have it, such a beautiful space and building. And what would you say is sort of if you had a day, bank holiday weekend coming up, and you could have a mooch and you had free time, where would you sort of go or eat? Or
Oh, I have to say, one of my favourite places, which plays a really big part in the Authenticity Project, is Brompton Cemetery.
So many people, adore.
Yeah, it's amazing. And, until I moved, I now live just really close to Brompton Cemetery. But I didn't know it was there until I moved into that house. And, it's the most fantastic space, and it sort of links the Lily Road and the Fulham Road. And it's like this sort of oasis, it's filled with wildlife, amazing trees, incredible blossom in the spring. It's just, it's a glorious place to walk around. And you can get real inspiration from the gravestones,
yes, I've done that before.
Yeah, it's an incredible place. And there's something really life-affirming about cemeteries. It sort of, it reminds you of the great circle of life and the fact that we're only here for a certain amount of time, and you have to make the most of it. Definitely. And, there's another author in Fulham, it's one of my great friends, Annabelle Abbs.
Yes.
And Annabelle has written several books, actually, about walking of various different types, and she has a whole chapter in her one of her latest books about walking through cemeteries and how that can help your sort of mental state.
Do you have a space where you go and write like J.K. Rowling?
You know what, this is really embarrassing to admit. But I started off writing at my kitchen table because it was the only place I had enough space to write.
Lots of great ideas, brands, businesses, all sorts of
all at the kitchen table. And there's something about the kitchen, the heart of the home. And,
Melinda's the same.
But I couldn't do it sort of later on in the day when everybody else was in the kitchen. So, I used to get up, and still do, at about 5 o'clock in the morning and write in the kitchen before anyone else came down for breakfast. And I find early mornings the most creative part of the day. It's when you think more laterally, and it's when sort of your subconscious is sort of takes to the fore rather than your conscious mind. It's a really sort of fantastic liminal part of the day, I think. So I started writing in the kitchen, and then when I published a book or two, I thought, okay, I should invest some of the money I've made in a proper writing space. So I created a writing room at the back of our house, it's got shelves and shelves of all my books. It's got sort of loads of light. It's got a big desk, and and I can't write in it. Because I'm so used to writing on my kitchen table and there's a sort of, I don't know, maybe it's just, I have this sort of strange feeling that I won't be able to write as well if I change the place I write. I don't know.
You have a beautiful room that you created where, sometimes you can go there and find it like, that's what I've done. That's what I created. I don't need to write in it, but that's what I've created. It's beautiful. My books.
Yeah,
it can always look pretty.
Yeah, if you look at my Instagram, there is a picture on my Instagram somewhere of what my kids call my ego bookcase. Because everything on it, I wrote myself.
Here we are.
Because whenever I publish a book in a different language, the publishers send me free copies. So I've just so there's
what a fantastic museum, Claire. Nothing to be ashamed of, but anything to be proud of.
And so, next up.
Yes.
Why?
The new book.
Have you finished it? Do you believe in friendship book clubs?
I can pass it right on to you, actually.
I would love to have it.
So your latest book,
due
to be released, and you're out on the proof tour. I've seen you on Instagram, sort of visiting all the booksellers and handing over.
I looked at sneak peeks. I think it's amazing, and I'm going to tell you now a little secret. I am fearless. I've never been scared of anything in my life.
That doesn't surprise me, actually.
But I am so scared of getting old.
Really?
Yes, and that is because I think I'm going to be one of those old grannies that does teenage
Yeah, well,
Yes, that-
that's like the people in this book.
So
Yeah.
so this book, I was very lucky to get a proof copy.
Yes, you were. And you
It
told me
wasn't
about it
actually-
way before the pod.
It wasn't actually for me. It was for Jasper.
Yeah.
Because
Well, just for and you.
well, because one day, well, of course, naturally, I guess, yes. So one day Claire sends an email asking if she could have Jasper's email address, because one of the characters is actually named after Jasper. And I forgot all about it. So we got the copy, and I thought, I really, really want to sort of have a read. And also sort of being in the club and getting a bit of an advance copy was just thrilling to me. So I sat at bed and I actually emailed Claire after and said, I'm sat there with my, don't judge me, my cup of sleepy tea, my specs on, reading it. And I literally see Jasper Shelbourne and almost like across the table. It's just like, oh my gosh, okay. Why did I not?
Was he one of the pensioners?
No.
So I looked at
tiny.
sneak peeks. Right, what is it all about? And
Well, it's perfect. It's perfect because literally
Yeah.
our last guest we had was the director of a community centre.
Oh.
So we
there
spoke
we
to
go.
so that's just come out. So we spoke to her. So it's fantastic. You know, that's what we're all about: community, giving people in our community a voice. So it couldn't have been more perfect to have you here today. But what I really loved about it is that thing of how to age disgracefully, which is definitely something that's going to be
Why
on
the
my
name?
agenda.
I'm now 55, and so on my last birthday, I thought, oh my God, I'm closer to 60 than I am to 50. But I don't know about you
Claire,
guys. I mean,
you're
I don't.
55, 5 years to go, and still looking like you're 30.
Oh, you're very kind.
And I'm 15.
But I don't know about you, but I don't feel any different from the way I did when I was 35.
Mentally in your head, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel a bit wiser and a bit more battered around the edges, but generally I feel just the same. And I guess when I'm 75, I'm still not going to feel any different. I'll just be wiser again and more battered around the edges. So I really wanted to write a book about older people who refuse to age gracefully and refuse to play to the stereotypes.
May I ask, was it somebody that made you write this book, somebody in your life, or was it just something that you really wanted to write about?
Someone who inspired you.
Yeah, like an inspiration.
No, I guess
Thank you.
if I look at my parents and their friends, they are not the sort of the pensioners that you read about in novels. If you read about an older person in a novel, they tend to be a bit part for a start. They're not the main characters. And they tend to be sort of sad, old, lonely, unable to deal with technology, and they are generally saved by a younger person who makes them come out of their shell. And I thought, actually, bollocks to that. I think it would be quite interesting to have older people who are teaching the younger generation how to live properly.
Definitely, the main character is definitely.
Oh,
wow,
do you not
character.
spoil it, please?
No, I'm no spoiler.
No, it's not a spoiler.
Yeah.
I mean, but it is fair to say that each of these characters are. They each have a complex backstory, and they're all hiding various secrets. And yes, they are definitely not aging gracefully in any way, shape, or form. But it's all set around a community centre in Hammersmith, so just down the road. Yeah. So the idea is you've got this senior citizens social club on one side of the hall, and on the other side there's a council-run nursery, and this community centre is also used by Alcoholics Anonymous, by the antenatal group. We all know spaces like this. We've got them in Fulham as well. I just thought I couldn't write another book in Fulham. So Hammersmith was about as far as I was prepared to go. Anyway, early on, big incident in an early chapter, which leads to the council, so community centre, being threatened with closure, and all these disparate people club together to try and save their community centre, which leads to all sorts of various hijinks and bad behaviour. So that's the idea behind it: how to age disgracefully out in 4 weeks.
I think it's fantastic. I cannot wait to read it.
No, it is
Thank
fantastic.
you.
And good luck with it all.
Yes, and I mean, I just hope that people will read this book and then never look at a sort of septuagenarian in the same way again.
Yeah. So who do you who is this book for? Have you got a Dedication or...
Yeah, it's dedicated to my mother and one of my daughters.
Okay.
Because what I explore in all of my books really is intergenerational relationships. I'm always fascinated by the benefits of the different generations sort of, helping each other. And my mother is now 80 and my youngest daughter is 15, and they have the most incredible relationship. And that's why it's dedicated to them.
Well, Melinda, what we are doing with every guest, and you, Claire, are no exception, we are asking an on-the-spot question. Each.
Yikes.
Right, Melinda, do you want to...
You could go first.
Right, so I'm going to ask, because obviously you love Fulham so much, just like we all do. If we were to be told tomorrow that Fulham is not a place to be living in anymore, whereabouts would you move?
Oh,
Because you need to think about another place to write about.
I would move to Cornwall.
Wow, okay.
Because and I actually go to Cornwall quite a lot to write. It's my sort of, it's another place I'm able to write other than my kitchen table.
Are you taking the kitchen table with you?
Because my father's family are Cornish, and I've been going every year since I was born. And there's something about being by the sea that I find really healing. But I'm not sure I could live there all the time. I think the juxtaposition between somewhere like Cornwall and somewhere like Fulham is fantastic.
So I know you said recently, I saw something on social media, which is something we all sort of crops up and plays on our minds, something that you speak a lot, you go to events, you talk, you always think, oh, is anyone going to show up? Is anyone going to be here? Have you ever had, of course you wouldn't not have anyone show up because they want to hear what you've got to say, but have you ever had some sort of funny story where someone's asked you, like, I don't know, a really random question or something funny that's happened? Or
I did this really lovely event once in Scotland, and it was a really great audience and a really great space, and I was talking about one of my novels, and it wasn't a Q&A format, it was just me talking, and which is a bit harder. And there was this woman in the front row who started falling asleep.
No!
Right in the front row.
Your voice was so relaxed, Claire. We're looking at the positive.
And I was trying really hard not to let it put me off, but the whole time I was thinking, am I being really boring? What should I, what can I say to sort of keep her awake? And then every now and again she would sort of shake herself awake and she'd look around in this, has anyone noticed? And she'd be awake for about 5 minutes, then she'd start falling asleep again. And I really wanted to stop and say, excuse me, would you mind moving to the back?
really interrupting my flow
when
here.
do you know when you're listening to a podcast or when you're listening to an audiobook or whatever?
Yeah.
Some people do find it relaxing, and some people have such chaotic lives that perhaps that was their safe zone.
Yeah, that's very kind of you.
Don't take it too personally.
Yeah, exactly. I just read this the other day somewhere.
Subsequently, every now and again when I'm doing an event now, I do tell this story and say, if you're feeling particularly sleepy, please could you go to the back?
Coffee served through the
That's
event.
fantastic. And on that note, thank you so much for coming in. I've so enjoyed talking to you.
It's been
you're
amazing.
welcome.
Yeah,
It's been
it
such
really
fun.
was.
And thank you for everything you guys are doing for Fulham. Because, it's these sorts of things bring us all together, and that's fantastic.
Thank you for your
thank you
support.
so much
and
for coming.
Good luck.
And I cannot
Thank
wait
you.
to get my hands soon on that book.
Yes, I will hand it over. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you
Thank
so much,
you.
Claire.